Scales are fundamental musical constructs. Chords come from scales. Scales define a key. They're sort of DNA level information. They're also very, very handy when it comes to improvisation. So playing a solo, improvising over a chord progression, scales are very, very handy. We learn scales as guitarists, and really as musicians in general, in a very specific way, and that is playing every single note ascending and then playing every single note descending. Without a little attention paid to finding a way to make those scales evoke a little bit more musicality, they can sound very, very predictable and dry. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris. Today you will learn 4 techniques to bring a little bit more musicality to your scale playing. These are techniques that you can easily apply to any scale that you know, and we're going to be talking about major scale functionality, like those structures that are 7-note scales, much less about the pentatonic scale today. So these techniques are going to focus on those structures. I'm going to explain what those techniques are right now. Then we're going to zoom in and I'm going to demonstrate each one and sort of explain what the value is and show you how to do it, and give you some demonstration about how to deploy these things. So the 4 techniques we'll cover today is, number 1, half steps. Knowing where those half steps are in a 7-note structure is very important, because it's those half steps that sort of define what the scale's personality is, what the musical personality of the scale is. Clearly, all the intervals in a scale make up the personality ultimately, but as those half steps move, those are the interesting points that you want to try to target to see if you can evoke that scale sound. Here's a great example. Here's the A major scale. Half steps are between 3 and 4, and 7 and 1. Here's the Lydian mode, where the half step has shifted between 4 and 5. So you can see that half step shifting has changed the entire personality of the scale. So that first technique is going to be finding those half steps and finding out how to use those half steps to really nail the sonic signature of the scale. The second technique I want to show you today is chromatics. How do you leverage the notes that are not in the scale, right? They're going to sound terrible on their own, but is there a way to leverage them as passing notes? Like finding those, looking at those, and trying to deploy some techniques around chromatics is very, very helpful. Number 3 is wider intervals. Again, that demonstration earlier, just ascending and descending, all of the notes in a row. When you use wider intervals and you skip notes, you tend to create a wider intervallic design in the line that you're playing, and that generates more interest. Okay, so wider intervals is number 3. Number 4 is counterpoint. Now, counterpoint has a lot of implications. There are a lot of different types of counterpoint, but what we're really going to focus on today as far as counterpoint is concerned is using pedal tones. And pedal tones, I'll explain it when we get in close, but it's just using a single note to play other notes and return to that note to create some interesting harmonic movement, right? Okay, so those are the 4 techniques. Let's zoom in. I'll show you how to work on them, and I'll show you some examples of how to use them. Okay, let's make our scale playing, our 7-note scale playing, a little more interesting, a little more musical. Let's get these 4 new techniques in to really bring some more sort of maturity to our scalar playing. First thing I want to do is just demonstrate the problem. Here's our backing track. We're in the key of A. Here's how I learned the scale. Beautiful, but I'm not committing to anything. Right? I'm just blasting through the scales. So eventually, once you hear that a couple times, you're like, yeah, okay, that sounds pretty. And then you pick up your phone and you start checking your email. But figuring out how to take that structure and those beautiful notes and turn them into something more musical is what we're going to do today. So there are 4 techniques we're going to use. I'm just going to run through them. Half steps, chromatics, wide intervals, and pedal tones or counterpoint. So I'm just going to demonstrate these techniques fairly quickly, but you'll see that I'm going to use very simple, easy to see examples, and then I'll show you how to use each one, how to practice them, and how to basically deploy them. The first one is half steps. Here we go. Here's our A major scale. And as you can see, here's the 1 octave. The half steps are between the 3 and the 4, and the 7 and the 1. Second octave, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's our half steps again. 5, 6, 7, 1. So as you can see, the half steps are here, 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 and here. 3, 4, 7, 1, 3, 4, and 7, 1. So those half steps basically define what the scale's personality is. Obviously, all of the intervals really make up the sonic signature of the scale, but the half steps, they really present this smallest interval possible. And so utilizing that, and specifically targeting those for bending opportunities, will really, really set you up to get that sonic signature under control. The best way to do it right off the bat is to just use bends, and just use half-step bends, both ascending and descending, and I'll show you how to do that. Ascending, you basically play the note below the half step and bend it up, and then continue on the scale. Descending, when you get to the higher note, you have to go below it and bend up into it, and then release down to the lower note. I'll show you how that works. Here's the scale without any bends. Now I'm going to play the scale again, and I'm going to target those half steps and bend into the higher note from the note below. Right, so now we're bending from the note below the half step to the note above it. Descending, it's a little different because you have to bend into the higher note from below, so it takes a little planning. It goes like this. So that's a really nice exercise, just to get those half steps under your fingers. Here's what it sounds like when you are able to get those half steps and sort of like really goose them into the sonic signature of the scale. You get the idea, right? I'm using those half steps to really energize and focus on that signature. Where those half steps are on the scale is sort of the signature of the scale. It's the sonic personality. Okay, next one is chromatics. So chromatics are basically all the notes that are not in the scale. So here we have our major scale. The notes that are not in that structure, the notes that are left, are these. Those are the notes that are not in the scale. These are treacherous, dangerous notes. They're going to sound terrible over this chord progression. I'm just going to give you an example. Let's just take one of these puppies. Here's one. Right? Horrible. It's right next to two notes that are in the scale. But that's terrible. Now listen to when I use this as an approach note to either of those notes. Isn't that pretty? And that's just one of them, right? You can really get some mileage out of these things. Once you get that idea, the chromatic idea together, and you practice it for all the other notes, all the notes that are not in the scale, you can do stuff like this. Right? Really start to express something interesting, because what you're doing is just for a moment you're introducing the most tension you can possibly introduce, and you're resolving it immediately. And that adds real spice to these scales. Okay, the next one is wide intervals. So when you learn the scale, you learn it up and down and in order. Every note is in order. These are called seconds. These intervals, the half step is the minor second and the whole step is the major second. These are basically consecutive intervals, right? They're right next to each other, either a whole step or a half step. When you start to play the scale in wider intervals, and the first two to think about are thirds and fourths, you get a different sound, and you start to deploy wider intervals and ascending and descending intervals in the same phrase. So, for example, here's thirds. I'm not going to play seconds, 1, 2, right? I'm not going to play consecutive notes. I'm going to go in thirds. Right? Now I'm using thirds there. And the next one would be fourths, so not the third note, 1, 2, 3, but use the fourth note, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's what fourth sounds like. So now with these types of intervals, you get a little bit of variation and some ascending and descending information in the same line. Right? Really, really pretty stuff. Try fifths, try sixths, try different stuff, right? You're breaking up that ascending and descending consecutive structure by using other notes in the scale and widening the intervallic reach between the notes that you're playing. The final one I want to do is called counterpoint. And counterpoint has a bunch of different subcategories, but counterpoint really means notes relating to each other and moving in different directions and or different distances. So this can and does include one note not moving and another note moving around it. So let me demonstrate this. We're going to focus on the pedal tone, which is that one note staying the same and playing other notes around it and returning to it every time. So here's just a demonstration of what that looks like. Here's our scale, second octave of the A major scale. And I'm just going to use the root as my pedal tone. Very easy technique to see and understand. Obviously, the way to practice this is do that kind of thing for each note in the scale. Once you get this technique down, and I use this all the time, you can move it as you're playing. So I did some of this at the top, but here's another demonstration, just pedal tones. great technique, right? Half steps. Find the half steps in the scale. Use those as bending opportunities to crack open the personality of the scale. Have full control over that. Chromatics. Those are the super dangerous notes. You're creating massive tension in a short period of time and then resolving it. That's a fantastic skill to have. Wider intervals. Don't just go up and down the scale, but give some variety, give some tonal variety and some intervallic interest, ascending and descending. Finally, counterpoint and specifically pedal tones. Use that one note to accent other notes and return. This is a great technique to making a motif, some sort of a pattern that your audience can hear and is predictable, but it's got these very interesting intervallic designs where you're moving forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. Very, very spicy stuff. This will get your 7-note scale structures sounding very mature and sounding really, really interesting. Okay, so there it is. 4 new techniques that you can apply right now to any sort of 7-note scale structure that you know to add a little more interest. And we saw how just playing the scales as we learned them can be a little dry, right? Very, very predictable, ascending and descending, right? It works, but you're really not committed to saying much about the chord progression that's underneath you. These 4 techniques are a little dangerous. They're a little treacherous. You have to be careful because sometimes you bend a note up into a note. You have to understand what the chord is underneath. You might be making a mistake there and bending into the wrong note. So it does take some focus and some practice. But we saw how all 4 of these techniques really bring some real new life to these scales. Sort of makes them a little bit more sonically chaotic and interesting. I've tabbed all 4 of these exercises and techniques out. Those tabs are on Patreon and that's linked in the description below. Head on over there if you'd like to grab the tabs. If this channel excites you, if what I do here resonates with you and you're enjoying this and you'd like to show your support, head on over to Patreon and pledge there. And if you do, I thank you in advance. I hope this helps. These 4 techniques have helped me really shift my scale playing into something that sounds a bit more musically mature, right? So practice these techniques. Watch out, they're a little dangerous, they're a little treacherous. You really have to stay awake and watch what you're doing and listen to what you're doing. But they are so totally helpful. I hope they help you as well, and I'll see you next time.